Tonight we have a special guest. When we invited this gentleman, he wasn't running for president yet, so his GPA kind of went up on us as over the last couple of weeks. He actually announced he was running for president last Friday, and this is one of his first stops since announcing New Hampshire. So I'm going to keep this very short. I'd like to introduce Dr., Congressman, and presidential candidate Ron Paul.
Looks to me like the revolution is alive and well, don't you think so? And growing, too. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, before I make a few comments, I do want to introduce you, if you haven't met her before, but my wife is with me tonight, Carol. Well, I'm delighted to be here. I understand there have been a few changes in the party out here, and I'm happy to hear about that. Growing and more enthusiasm and more attuned to the principles of liberty and that goal that we're fighting for. And believe me, this is a very important state. We're here early in the campaign because we're going to keep coming and we'll be back again. And we want to make sure that this state leads the way and shows the rest of the country what liberty is all about. You know, I wish I could come and tell you that there's good news. We did get a few new members in Congress, and things are better. But I'll tell you what, the conditions aren't much better in Washington. The conditions are much better out here, outside of Washington. The enthusiasm is growing, the understanding is growing, the knowledge about what brought us to this mess and what we need to do, that's where I'm optimistic. I'm especially happy when I get to visit the college campuses because the next generation knows what a bum rap they're getting and what they're going to have to do. But in Washington, it's the same old stuff, and I'm pretty tired of it, and I know you are, and I think what we should do is change it all and change that whole concept of it. You know, of course, all of you here are involved in political action, and that's very important. But political action should only be a consequence of a philosophic position. The philosophic position and the understanding about where we and how we got into this mess is pretty clear. The political changes are just in the transition, and that's why it's so difficult. But we as a country have lived with bad economic policy for a long, long time. And I think one of the most telltale statements ever made by a president, at least in economic terms, was when I heard Nixon get on the radio one night back in 1971, and he announced and guaranteed that we're all Keynesians now. I want to wait for the day, I'm anxiously waiting for the day when we can say we're all Austrian economists and we believe in the free market. Which is not difficult to describe. If you're for the free market and individual liberty, you believe in individual rights, you believe in property rights, you believe in contracts, you believe in not stealing. That means the government can't steal either. But there is another important element to the free society and constitutional system, and that is you don't have a central bank and you don't have a Federal Reserve system. You know, we didn't quite get the full audit of the Fed last year. We passed it in the House due to a lot of work all of you have done. but it was watered down in the Senate, and they came out greatly watered down. But we did get some information out of the Fed from last year's bill. But also, we've gotten more information because of the 2 lawsuits by Fox Business as well as Bloomberg, which they filed suit under the Freedom of Information Act. So these are all things moving in the direction that actually I've been pretty surprised and pleased that we've gotten this far, because in the past, courts have always ruled in favor of the central bank. If you think back in history about the Civil War period and during the Depression, and actually in 1971, the courts always ruled in favor of the government's paper money system. But this time, I sort of was pessimistic that they would not rule in favor of the people in saying the Fed had to turn over some of this material. But they have, and I'll tell you what, I think it's the first time in this 100-year history of the Federal Reserve that they're on the defensive right now. I actually take a little bit of a pride in the fact that now the Federal Reserve Board chairman has to hold press conferences, and they hired a lobbyist. They've hired a lobbyist to go around and represent their position in the Congress, because they know that you have awakened and you're knowledgeable now about the Federal Reserve, and it's never happened before. The Fed has gotten off with, just anything they want to. They always got the credit for the good times, even though those were artificially boom times. And then they always got credit for getting us out of the bad times. Right now, the evidence is very clear that they created the problems by creating an artificial boom, and now they're going to get blamed, rightfully so, for the problems that we're facing today. That doesn't mean that the people of this country and the Congress doesn't have a lot of responsibility, because they do. We all have the responsibility because we've been negligent. We've ignored the Federal Reserve, and Congress is still a participant in these problems. The Congress, they tend to spend too much money. Have you noticed that? And they tend to, and I frequently will call the Federal Reserve a facilitator, because the Federal Reserve is related to the deficit, because members of Congress for too long have gotten away with saying, well, what do I have to get reelected? And the people say, well, just vote for my special privileges, and I want, my subsidies. And the members of Congress kept getting reelected until this last go-around, and was a little bit different. If you were playing the pork barrel program all the time, it didn't necessarily help you. So these conditions are changing, and this is very, very good. The Federal Reserve, has been around for nearly 100 years, but right now we're getting more information, and people say, well, are we going to end the Fed? Can you get your bill passed? Is that what's going to happen? The bill and getting the consensus from the Congress to repeal the Federal Reserve Act, it's not likely. But I tell you what, just getting the information out, and with the knowledge about what they're doing, and what the consequences will be, they're going to self-destruct. That's what's going to happen. They'll become irrelevant. Since the Federal Reserve, represents a moral hazard, that is, that Congress does things and with the expectation that the Federal Reserve will react in a certain way. So the Congress runs up deficits, whether it's for the welfare entitlement system or for the militarism around the world. The debt is there, and the Fed is then able to monetize it, just perpetuating the problems. The whole problem with doing something decent to get us out of this financial mess is that we're doing exactly the same things that got us into the mess, and it doesn't work that way. We were spending too much money in Washington. There were too many taxes, too many regulations, too much borrowing, and too much printing press money. So what did they do? We have the predictable collapse of the bubble. So what does Congress and the Federal Reserve do? They just do more of the same thing, and they think they're going to get different results, and all they're doing is prolonging the agony. The criminal aspect of this is that the people who deserved to go bankrupt didn't go bankrupt, and the people who didn't deserve to go bankrupt, they lost their jobs and their houses, and the other side, and the big guys got bailed out. But since the Federal Reserve encourages deficit spending and irresponsibility in the Congress, what do we end up? We end up with, the economic financial entitlement system, which is absolutely out of control. And there seems to be no way we can turn the switch off and turn it off. So I expect it's going to continue to get worse until, they ruin the money. But the other thing that they have done, and they do this notoriously for all nations seem to have done this throughout history, that wars are almost always paid for by debasing the currency. If they weren't allowed and would not debase the currency, we would be prohibited from getting ourselves involved in so many of these no-win, nonsensical wars that we ought to stop and bring our troops all home. And this view is growing in popularity. There's a few years ago that it wasn't nearly as popular. Where the debate was just recently down in South Carolina, I would make a few statements this way, and I don't know if anybody remembers, but they actually booed me for some of that stuff. Can you believe that? And and now, this year, they're making the same statements over and over again. I can't seem to get a new speech because my speech is always the same. I don't know why you don't get tired of it. But my speech is the same. But the people are responding differently. I always figured that I really didn't expect to go to Washington. I really didn't. And I ended up going there. I wanted to get a few things off my chest. So I ended up going, and I get elected. I decided I didn't want to make a career of it. I went back home and practiced medicine for 12 years. So I didn't expect that much to happen. But even after the last election, or during that election, I was surprised at the reception. To me, it was just fantastic that people were looking and talking and thinking along these lines that, maybe the Constitution is important after all. So the last campaign was a pleasant surprise for me because of the interest. And then what I thought would happen would be that I would serve in Congress and I would do my very best. I would make my promises. I would take my oath of office seriously. I would vote a certain way and I would leave a record, and maybe someday your kids or somebody would read about it and say, I think he probably voted the right way back in those days. But something happened on my way to retirement, and people noticed, and to my delight and to the excitement of what's been happening on the interest, people have become fascinated. But after the last election, the campaign in 08, I thought, once again, I was often said, I was that totally unknown congressman doctor from Texas, and where did he come from? And I thought, well, this is what will happen. I'll go back to being this totally unknown doctor from Texas in Congress and wait for the time that I should do something better. But all of a sudden, then there was an explosion of interest on all the networks wanting to talk about economic policy. They're starving for the answers, and free market economists. See, I don't claim I have the answers as much as I have latched on to the correct philosophy of free market economics, which we talk about, but we don't fully understand. And that's what people are looking for, because they know now that Keynesian economics with the Federal Reserve System has failed, and we have to find something different.